Hello fans of true crime stories. Today I will tell you about three of the most tragic cases, and we begin.
On Sunday, May 4, 2003, Melissa Cady's brother returned home from graduation to find his mother in tears. Melissa Cady Autry was found around 4 a.m. when the fire alarm in her dorm went off. She was alone in her room, badly burned and barely alive. This is the story of the Cady Autry crime. Let's figure out what really happened to the girl. Melissa Cady Autry was born on May 10, 1984. In Kentucky, she had an unstable childhood due to her mother's mental illness. Cady and her sister were placed in foster care. The girl studied well. She was short, petite blonde. In preparation for college, Cady decided to attend Western Kentucky University to remain close to her adoptive and biological families. Cady began her freshman year in the fall of 2002 and enjoyed college life and the taste of independence, eventually meeting a good friend who became her roommate. They often went to parties and enjoyed drinking and having fun on campus. Cady was so overwhelmed by the turbulent youth life that at some point she received a not very pleasant nickname, the whore from the second floor. She was involved in a long-term sexual relationship with a guy named Maurice. However, Maurice had a girlfriend out of town and did not want a serious relationship with Cady. During her freshman year of college, Cady decided to break free from the Kentucky foster care system. She wanted to be independent, but it also meant she lost her college funds and had to find money on her own. She began looking for work and earning extra money. The girl even managed to work as an exotic dancer. On Saturday, May 23, 2003, Cady and her roommate were planning to attend a party. The girls had been drinking heavily beforehand, so when they finally arrived at the party, Cady was already drunk. She had a habit of crying and being dramatic when she was drunk, and her roommate often had to babysit her. Cady noticed Maurice and asked him to dance, but he refused. Cady got upset and started a fight with Maurice. She became aggressive and the fraternity leaders asked her to leave. One of the promises of the fraternity of this party was to take people home, and naturally it was assumed that Cady would be taken too. Her roommate was having fun and didn't want to leave. She promised to call Cady later. She also thanked the driver for taking Cady home. At 2:30 a.m., shortly after Cady left the party, her roommate called to check on her and make sure she was okay. Cady answered the phone and said she was in bed. Then she told her neighbor that there was a guy in her room and she got scared. She said she didn't know who this guy was. The unknown man himself called his roommate and said that it was he who brought Cady home. He said he wanted to make sure the girl got to her room because she was very drunk, and assured Cady's friend that everything was fine. Before hanging up, neighbor Cady, let's call her Sarah, thought she heard a second male voice in the room, but she wasn't too worried and told Cady she'd see her in the morning. About an hour and a half later, the fire alarm went off. This was not unusual in a college dorm and was often the result of someone burning the popcorn. The students filed out of the building, some half asleep and some still drunk. They assumed it was another false alarm until firefighters removed the badly burned body. Rescuers entered the dorm room and quickly located the source of the fire. Upon entering the room, the fireman said that the sprinkler had already put out the fire, but he saw something shiny on the bed. He didn't realize it was a person until he saw his chest rise. Lying on the bed was a severely beaten and burned Cady Autry. Her face was wrapped in a shirt and another piece of cloth was wrapped around the sprinkler system. It was clear that something terrible had happened to Katie. She was, in fact, a source of ignition. Someone set her on fire while she was alive. As they carried her out of the building, she told the firefighters to take me home. Katie had severe burns to her chest and genital area, and a can of hairspray was found, which turned out to be used as an accelerator. An alcohol gel was also placed inside Katie, presumably to eliminate any evidence of sexual assault. She was transferred to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee in critical condition. The doctors explained that Katie's burns were so severe that they probably destroyed most of her nerve endings, and this was something of a savior as it would greatly reduce her pain. Despite exceptional care, Katie was unable to survive her injuries and died a few days later on May 7, 2003. The police were trying to figure out why her roommate, Sarah, with whom she was always with, was not home that night. Sarah explained that she was with another friend that night, but told authorities about an ominous phone conversation between her, Katie, and an unknown man. Since the man said he was the one who brought her home, they needed to look at the designated driver. He was called in for an interview, but he denied knowing what happened to Katie after he dropped her off. They even questioned her boyfriend Maurice, but he had an alibi. They eventually returned to the driver who gave Katie a ride home after the party and learned that she was not the only person in the car. According to the driver, his friend Stephen Soules was with him that night. He was a resident of nearby Scottsville and did not attend university. He went to a party with friends, but was drunk and passed out in the back seat of the car. On the way back to the dorm, Katie teased Stephen about being sick and called him a sick boy. When Katie got out of the car, Stephen told his friend that he wanted to punish her and also followed her out. Stephen Soules was brought in for questioning. He was known in his communications as a liar and a thief. Stephen was a year or two older than Katie and was very lazy, didn't go to college, didn't work. He often hung out with other losers in Scottsville, Kentucky. He was called a jerk. He never got into serious trouble, but despite this he became famous as a liar, a cheat and a thief. Many people he interacted with did not trust him and considered him a freeloader. When Stephen was brought in for questioning, authorities learned that Stephen and a group of his friends had attended a fraternity party that evening. By the time the party started, the guys were very drunk. Stephen became ill and went home in his friend's car. He told investigators that on the way to the dorm, he and Katie kissed in the back seat. At first he refused to go up to her dorm room. The boyfriend later admitted that after she got out of the car, he followed her and snuck into her room before she closed the doors. According to him, the girl did not mind at all, and they made love. The more police talked to Stephen, the more he changed his story. He eventually told authorities that he did not harm Katie, but knew who did. He said that while he was with Katie in her room, his friend Lucas Goodrum called him and asked where he was. A little later, Lucas appeared in the dorm room and told Katie that he also wanted sex and wanted to join. According to Stephen, Katie answered no, and then Lucas attacked her. Stephen insisted that Katie resisted, but could not cope with Lucas, who was much larger. He then reported that he saw Lucas begin to kill Katie and set her on fire. In the spring of 2003, Lucas turned 21 years old. He, like Stephen, did not work anywhere, did not study anywhere. Lucas has been married before, divorced, and has a young son. His ex-wife claimed that Lucas constantly insulted and offended her. The day before the attack on Katie, Lucas was arrested on domestic violence charges against his then-girlfriend. The guy's mother married his stepfather several years ago, who turned out to be the heir to famous stores. Thus, the Lucas family had money and often supported the guy, while he refused to work and regularly used illegal substances. Lucas eventually moved to Scottsville with his father and stepmother. Stephen and Lucas were friends, but according to Lucas they often quarreled. Despite frequent quarrels, the guys agreed to spend the evening of May 3 together and attend a party with other mutual friends. When Lucas was brought in for questioning, he remembered seeing Katie at the party, but denied going into her dorm room. Lucas did not know what happened to Katie and denied any involvement in the crime. His father and stepmother said that he was home at that time, that night, which provided him with an alibi. Authorities believed Stephen Soules' story. Police said they had no reason not to believe Stephen. As a result, Stephen and Lucas were arrested and charged with a crime of the first degree. They both faced the death penalty. While awaiting trial, DNA tests came. Despite attempts to use alcohol gel and burn the girl, biological material was still extracted from her. As a result, the DNA matched the biological material of Stephen Soules. Stephen admitted to attacking Katie, but said he only did it after Lucas, and because Lucas threatened to take his life if he didn't. Given the lack of evidence against Lucas, authorities were not confident that they would achieve a conviction. Then they decided to offer Stephen Soules a deal. Stephen agreed to plead guilty to all charges, in exchange for Stephen's death penalty being dropped. Stephen, in turn, was also scheduled to testify against Lucas at the upcoming trial. In court, Stephen once again changed his version. He still said that it was Lucas who attacked, beat and abused Katie. However, the guy claimed everything he did was Lucas's fault. It was his friend who forced him to do it. Stephen said that he only used Katie on Lucas's orders, but Lucas set her on fire. But despite his testimony, Stephen Soules was the only person whose DNA was found at the crime scene. Then he finally admitted to raping and setting Katie on fire, which led to her death. Lucas had an alibi for the night and vehemently denied any involvement. His DNA was not found at the scene and no evidence could directly link him to the crime. The only connection was that Stephen Soules and a prison informant said so, who claimed that Lucas confessed to the crime in prison while awaiting trial. This was not enough for the jury. Lucas was found not guilty of all charges and was released. Katie's family were devastated and believe Lucas got away with his crimes. Stephen Soules was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains with the Kentucky Department of Corrections to this day. He is now approximately 40 years old. A few years after the trial, Lucas was charged with domestic violence against his ex-wife. He moved to Texas and dropped out of the public eye. I have not been able to find out his current whereabouts. Although many people believe Lucas is guilty, there is not enough evidence. Dorm rooms had to be unlocked with a resident card key. Stephen admitted that he followed Katie before the door closed behind her, but how Lucas could have gained access to the building later. Why wasn't his DNA found in Katie? Why Lucas had a 100% alibi? I understand that his parents' alibi may not be reliable, but many factors led the investigation to the fact that Stephen was in deep trouble and wanted to point the finger at someone else for his heinous crime. Perhaps this or Lucas is still guilty and really was in this hostel. What do you think, friends? Even if he was involved in this crime, then, unfortunately, the investigation was unable to collect evidence confirming this, and this is sad. Some believe that Lucas was privileged because he could afford a better lawyer than his alleged accomplice. Regardless of opinions about the outcome of this case, one thing is certain: the students and faculty of this university are forever changed. Security protocols have been changed as a result of this horrific crime. Katie will never be forgotten by those who loved her and by people who never even knew her. Thank you for watching. I recommend watching other stories. Click right now, and also subscribe to my channel. See you soon. Social media allows people from all over the world to communicate and gives us the opportunity to connect with people we would most likely never meet without the internet. Among millions of such users was the heroine of this story, Ashlyn Black. A 25-year-old girl who loved fashion and outdoor activities, who enjoyed vintage stores, hiking and listening to the music of Nirvana. She lived in Lethan, Utah in the United States and worked as a caregiver for children who had developmental issues. Her family said she loved being a voice for those who may have had a harder time speaking for themselves, and the job just appealed to her. Ashlyn couldn't wait to be a mother herself. It was something she wanted with all her heart. She was going to take a child from an orphanage, and her family believes that her work as a caregiver influenced her decision. She was kind, patient and friendly, with a loud, infectious laugh that people said made everyone immediately feel comfortable around her. May 23, 2020. Ashlyn was once again browsing through Tinder profiles like so many other people around the world. She soon met a 24-year-old man named Ethan Hunsaker, who had recently become a father and was going through a divorce from his wife and was now renting a house by himself. This couple quickly found common ground and decided to go on a date to some restaurant to drink and have a good time. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Ethan drove up to Ashley's house to pick her up. The couple headed to a local bar where they stayed for about 4 hours before heading to Ethan's house. A few hours later at 3:19 a.m., 911 received a call at 3:19 a.m., in which a man was talking about wanting to kill himself because he had killed someone. The man who called was Ethan, but on the phone he said he didn't even know Ashlyn, didn't know her last name, that he wanted the police to shoot him when they arrived at the house. The police didn't hesitate and arrived on the scene shortly thereafter. They found Ashlyn in one of the rooms lying face down with stab wounds all over her body. The ambulance crew tried everything possible to save Ashlyn, but it was too late. Ashlyn was pronounced dead at the scene. Ethan had wounds all over his body and it was clear that he was responsible for Ashlyn's death, and his wound was a sign of Ashlyn's self-defense. Ethan said that they spent the evening together that night, came home, slept together, and then just fell asleep afterward. Ethan said that at some point he woke up and something happened in his head. He saw Ashlyn sleeping on his arm and started choking her as hard as he could while Ashlyn struggled. While the girl lay on the floor in a semi-conscious state, Ethan grabbed a knife from the kitchen and knelt down in front of Ashlyn and started stabbing her. He said he watched Ashlyn bleed for about 10 minutes before calling 911. This news spread quickly on the news. Reporters interviewed Ethan's neighbors and all of them could not believe that something like this could have happened in their neighborhood. One of the neighbors, Austin Coleman, said that he has lived in the area for about 2 years and he can safely say that it is a quiet place where something like this could not have happened. Austin also said that he had met Ethan on the street a few times. They waved at each other a couple times and Austin then decided that Ethan was not a bad guy. Even before the investigation began, the police realized that the attack was unlikely to have been provoked by Ashlyn's actions. When the police began their investigation, they could not understand Ethan's motives. From the man's words, the date went well and they really hit it off. There was no conflict between them, but lo and behold, one moment the couple was sleeping peacefully and the next moment Ashlyn was dead. Ethan soon confessed that he had invited Ashlyn over with the sole intention of killing her. He planned that if Ashlyn decided to spend the night at his house, he would commit the murder. When Ethan was taken into custody without bail, the man was calm and unemotional. Ashlyn became the second such victim in Utah to be robbed of her life after dating Tinder. Black's family called the accused a monster in a statement. Ethan Hunsaker was charged with first-degree murder. To everyone's surprise, Ethan pleaded not guilty to Ashlyn's murder a short time later. As rumors began to spread about what had happened, acquaintances were divided in their opinions. Some of them were shocked by what he had done, while others were not surprised at all. Before the crime, Ethan had been working at the company, and his manager planned to transfer Ethan to a new position and entrust him with one-on-one work with clients. But Ethan's co-workers opposed this decision. They said that Ethan's behavior changed dramatically after his separation from his wife. The man had become withdrawn and no longer paid attention to his work. At first, he was just late for work, and then he stopped showing up for his shifts altogether. After a couple of months of such changes, Ethan was fired after an argument with another female employee. Details of the incident were never released. His entourage says that Ethan made many dark and sinister comments about wanting to hurt and kidnap women. Ethan also often talked about wanting to hurt himself. Ethan's boss said that all of Ethan's coworkers thought of him as an inept simpleton who was always saying something stupid. But as his statements became more and more sinister, everyone found his behavior strange and wanted nothing to do with him. The boss also added that what Ethan had been arrested for did not surprise him at all. A woman named Otham also decided to share her story with the media. She said that just a few weeks before Ashlyn's murder, Ethan started flooding the girl with messages on all social networks, and he didn't stop until he committed the crimes. Otham and Ethan had known each other for about 11 years at that point, having met at their old job. The girl says that this communication started out quite friendly and they often talked during their lunch breaks. Otham stated that she had no romantic interest in Ethan and never gave him any reason to believe they could become anything more than just friends. But in 2019, Ethan started asking Otham out on dates. When the girl turned him down, he didn't stop insisting. Eventually, she started ignoring his messages, but then Ethan started looking for other ways to contact her by sending messages on different social networks. The story would later be covered in the news, and it would reveal that Otham and Ethan had actually known each other since 2009, and for 10 years they were just friends. Ethan only decided to turn their interactions into romantic ones in 2019, and Otham tried to be nice and tried to let him know that she wasn't interested. Otham also revealed that she never felt threatened or that a man was being aggressive. He was just being very persistent, but some gut feeling told her not to take things to the next level with this person. She also mentioned that Ethan had mentioned that he had no friends and no one to talk to, so she had kept in touch, even if it was only by correspondence. When she found out what Ethan had done, she was horrified. She realized she'd known him for 11 years. If she'd ever agreed to go out with him, she'd be in Ashlyn's shoes. She is grateful to her premonition that she escaped such a fate, but she grieves with Ashlyn's family, and it is very hard for her to realize what the girl and her family had to experience because of such a senseless crime. Otham believes that the reason for such an act was Ethan's divorce and his worries. The man had never been seen committing any crimes, and at that moment he just lost his head. The police believe this case is as transparent as possible about the motive and reasons for the crime. They stated that Ethan clearly had homicidal tendencies, and his divorce only drove him to it. The police will have to decide what kind of punishment this man with obvious mental problems deserves. The Black family should get justice because no one was prepared for them losing their daughter over a casual Tinder date. Police will have to look into the case closely to see what kind of punishment Ethan deserves. A spokeswoman for the Utah domestic violence community emphasized the fact that many people on social media blame Ashlyn for the incident, not Ethan. She stated that the victim was not to blame for what happened to her, and people should not forget that. It doesn't matter how they met because it was the perpetrator's own decision to commit violence. Advocates for such victims are concerned that people on social media continue to blame the victims for what happened. It does not matter that they decided to come to such a meeting. They don't deserve to be hurt or killed. The lawyers are sure that there is nothing wrong with dating apps. They give people the opportunity to find each other, and Ethan's actions are completely abnormal and unnatural. Ashlyn's lawyer said that Ashlyn's case proves once again how aggressive men can be towards women who trusted them, and that the blame lies squarely on Ethan because it was his choice to commit the crime. In June 2021, new information about the case came to light. Ethan finally pleaded guilty. To the relief of the Black family, they didn't have to take a plea bargain. Ethan himself pleaded guilty to the murder and to his unstable mental state. Ethan's lawyers insisted that his mental state be taken into account in court. Several doctors examined him and came to the same diagnosis. Ethan was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, recurrent psychiatric disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and severe major alcohol use disorder. Ethan's confession was an important event for the Black family. Ashland's attorney said this will move the case toward its conclusion and the nearly year-long pause will finally be over. Despite Ethan's diagnoses, the prosecutor believes the man will still spend the rest of his life behind bars. The prosecutor believes that these diagnoses do not invalidate Ethan's guilt and his condition does not require specialized treatment outside of incarceration. The judge in this case decided that Ethan's condition at the time of the offense did not invalidate his guilt and was irrelevant. So Ethan faced the first of 3 sentencing options: detention, sending him to a psychiatric hospital for 18 months before going to prison, or treatment in a psychiatric hospital with no time limit. Ultimately, in February 2022, Ethan was sentenced to life in prison with 18 months of pre-trial treatment at a Utah hospital. The judge said he hoped Ethan would get the help he needed, but added that was not the main reason he ordered him into treatment. He said he was actually worried about other inmates and prison staff. Worried that Ethan could hurt a lot of people and this move could keep them safe. Ashland's mother said they felt the court didn't give Ethan the harsh enough sentence he deserved by giving him treatment and housing. To this the judge apologized, stating that the court's hands were tied for many reasons. Ashland's family said the crime was as senseless as it was evil. They told our hearts were broken and our lives forever changed because of the actions of a stranger. The life of a cheerful young girl who was passionate about helping those who could not stand up for themselves was taken away. Hello everyone. Today we will get acquainted with a mystery case that requires very, very strong nerves and which will be assessed very ambiguously. It's up to you to draw your own conclusions, but let's get straight to the point. Lacey Fletcher was born on November 25, 1985 to Clay and Sheila Fletcher. The girl was the only child in a family living in a small village in Louisiana. This village had no more than 1,000 inhabitants, and its name is very suitable for the theme of today's story. When the girl was about 9 years old, she and her parents lived in a new house, in a good residential area on Slater Street. This street ended in a dead end with pictures of houses and beautiful gardens. From the outside it seems that the world there is much more beautiful and life should be happier than in another place. Fletcher's family looked like a typical middle-class family. Lacey's mother, Sheila, worked as a court clerk. Her duties included responsibility for all administrative procedures in the court in Baker, and her father worked in a nonprofit organization. The family was devout and attended church every Sunday. Lacey attended Baptist Academy and played on the volleyball team there. Neighbors said that Lacey was no different from ordinary children. She was cheerful, active, and communicated with other children. She looked like a petite, well-built girl who loved to play sports in the garden or run around the street. However, when she was 14 years old, her parents took the girl out of school, and from then on she was homeschooled. By that time, Lacey began to show signs of Asperger's syndrome, although invisible to the uninitiated person. Asperger's syndrome is an autistic disorder that is most often accompanied by impaired empathy, lack of social competence, and often unusual interests. The development of the victim's intelligence is almost the same as that of a healthy person, and therefore it is not entirely clear why Lacey was taken out of school and put into homeschooling. The parents have not publicly made any statements regarding this matter. Perhaps it had something to do with Asperger's syndrome and social disorders. But neither the neighbors nor the children noticed anything unusual in Lacey's behavior. A friend and classmate of Lacey later said that they became immediate friends when Lacey was at school, and described the girl as a very close and dear person. She mentioned that Lacey was often reserved and shy, but at the same time could clearly express her opinion on a given occasion. After Lacey stopped going to school at age 14, communication between her friends was severed, and her classmate heard almost nothing from her again. And once, although she doesn't remember from whom, a friend heard that Lacey regularly visited a psychologist as a teenager, which was a little unusual at that time, and in most cases, visits to a psychologist were for serious reasons. A neighbor of the Fletcher family named Robert said in 2022 that he saw Lacey about 15 years ago, that is, when she was in her early 20s. At that time, the grown girl sometimes hung out with his younger brother, since their houses were next door. And even then Robert noticed that she was not like people her age. She just had other interests. While other girls went to parties, drank alcohol, or were interested in guys, Lacey preferred to watch Disney films alone. In general, after 14 years, the girl grew up and seemed more and more withdrawn. She went out less and less, did not go to school, and she had almost no friends left. After Lacey actually stopped communicating with the brother of this neighbor Robert and she was not visible, everyone decided that most likely either the family moved somewhere or Lacey was sent to study in another place, but this was not the case. And if someone knew that Lacey had been living in her parents' house all these years, it would have been possible to save her. In May 2017, Robert met with Lacey's father and decided to inquire about the girl's fate, wanting to know how she was doing, where she had moved and how her life was going, where she would learn, what she was studying. But Lacey's father replied that she was fine and still lived at home, and then quickly changed the topic of conversation. All this seemed strange to the neighbor even then, because at that time the girl should have already been a little over 30, and living next door it is still possible to see how neighbors take out the trash, come or go somewhere. However, in all the years no one has seen Lacey, and even this strange departure of his father from the conversation, but the neighbor's suspicions remained with him. January 2022 at 2:30 a.m. The local police station received a call. It was Lacey's mother, Sheila Fletcher, who sounded distressed and reported that her daughter had stopped breathing. Police and ambulances immediately headed to the house. At the same time, the city coroner was notified that when authorities entered the house, they smelled a disgusting odor. It was the smell of rot and feces, and breathing that air in the house was simply unbearable. The coroner would later say that in his entire professional career he had never smelled anything worse than this smell, and he was unable to eat properly for a week due to nausea. And this man had a nervous breakdown, although he worked as a doctor and coroner for 30 years. Over the years, he saw various incidents, accidents, but what appeared before his eyes in the Fletcher house plunged him into shock and horror. The police sheriff was also completely confused by the picture he saw in the house. V prostornoj gustinoj neadilsa divan, na katorum lazala Lacey, s pervogo vzglada na liko mozno bilo ponit, cto edge gadi to 36 let, no vid u ne uhoshenij, atu na pervij vzglad. Upon closer examination, it turned out that Lacey weighed 43 kilograms, she was very emaciated, she was wearing only a t-shirt, and it was pulled up above her chest. The eyes were wide open, and the hair was completely tangled and resembled a thick wicker rug that had somehow ended up on the head, and it was impossible to comb this hair. Her entire body was stained with feces, even waste was found in her ears, nostrils, and mouth. There were bed sores all over her body that were festering, and some were so deep that they reached the bones. Mostly, bed sores appear in those who are bedridden due to illness. Lacey had brown spots and bed sores all over his body, his buttocks were completely deformed, and the skin was missing in places. Lacey was infested with maggots, insects that ate into parts of her body, causing incredible suffering. The photos taken at that time were never published in the media, on the internet, or anywhere else, as they were simply terrible and could be traumatic for people. Even the coroner and the police officers, who responded to the call by profession, could not come to their senses for a long time from what they saw. However, there is a publicly available photo of the sofa on which Lacey died. This piece of furniture was completely destroyed. It rotted, and where Lacey lay with her buttocks, a huge hole formed, in which human remains were found: skin, pus, and feces. Even the wooden floor under the sofa was covered in all this and began to rot. During the autopsy, the coroner found remains of foam from the sofa upholstery in the girl's stomach. Apparently, she was so hungry that she started eating the sofa. The cause of Lacey's death is investigative, which means that death was not due to one cause, but a combination of many factors, including bed sores that needed urgent treatment, as well as bone inflammation and blood poisoning. When they found Lacey, her mother was sitting with her on the sofa and crying. Father Clay looked completely emotionless. The investigators naturally had many questions. How could it happen that a person ended up in such a state when they began to neglect him? Why the parents who lived in the house did nothing, and why they allowed everything to go so far. Initially, the girl's parents did not want to publicly comment on this. Later, the mother testified that Lacey moved further and further away from them, and when she turned 20, at some point she did not want to leave the house at all. She had no interests. At some point, Lacey refused to get off the couch, after which the parents went to the doctor, but it was the doctor they went to for consultations without Lacey, since she refused to leave the house. This doctor advised taking the girl to the hospital, but Lacey did not want to go anywhere, and it seemed that the parents did not know what to do next. Her condition worsened, and at some point Lacey didn't even get up to go to the bathroom. She began to relieve herself on a towel that her mother put near the sofa, and sometimes this just happened in bed, and the girl lay silently and distantly. The mother further said that she constantly brought her daughter food, also gave her drinks, and tried to care for her wounds, which arose from the fact that the girl was always lying on the sofa. Lacey never complained of pain, and was sane until the very end. When Lacey suddenly stopped breathing, her mother called 911, but it was too late. There were rumors that a neighbor forced the parents to call, who saw Lacey through the window lying on the sofa and realized that something was wrong. He told the girl's mother to choose, and if she does not report to the police, then he will do it himself, but subsequently the police did not confirm this information, but as you know, rumors do not appear out of nowhere. They are generated by the lack of information. Later it became known that the girl's parents were not at home for almost 2 days before her death, and during these days their daughter remained hungry. Of course, maybe the mother put some food on the sofa, but still no one cared about her these days. The question arises, why didn't Lacey get up from the couch and get herself something to eat, because she was in her right mind? Some sources suggest that the girl suffered from locked-in syndrome, in which a person is fully conscious but physically almost completely paralyzed and is caused by brain damage. In general, Lacey lived exclusively on this sofa for more than 12 years without getting up. In court, members of the jury required medical assistance to somehow deal with photographs of Lacey's body. When these photos were shown, there was complete silence in the courtroom. Everyone present was simply shocked and could not believe what they saw. May 2, 2022. Clay and Sheila were charged with second-degree murder and were initially sent to the East Felicia jail. The parents repeatedly asserted that they were not to blame and emphasized that their daughter Lacey was of sound mind to the end and could make her own decisions. On May 4, the Fletchers were released on $300,000 bail, and the trial did not end there. But how impossible it is to imagine that the parents left their daughter to decompose alive on the sofa, doing nothing or taking any action. They even watched TV in the evenings in the same room. That is, the sofa on which Lacey was lying stood in the family's living room, and in the evenings the parents watched movies, while their daughter lay nearby in this state. This is unimaginable, since the smell of feces and rot throughout the house was simply unbearable, and yet the parents also lived there, leading a normal life. Lacey lived abnormally, and her parents continued to act as if nothing had happened. There are other very scary details that were never made public, and people familiar with this story still wonder how this could happen and whether it was an insidious process that lasted 12 years. When Lacey will one day be left lying on the couch and her condition slowly deteriorates more and more. Of course, her bed sores did not appear yesterday or today, but over a long period of time. And one more thing, let's say someone's child declares that he won't go to the bathroom or toilet anymore. How can you let it happen and brush it off? And even if Lacey was already an adult, there was still a way to place her in some institution, at a minimum, where they could help her, albeit forcibly. Of course, this requires considerable financial investment, and it is hard to believe that Lacey's parents did not have the funds for such medical care. They had a permanent job in which they earned good money, and had a large house in a good, lively area. And it looks like they weren't deeply in debt, as they quickly put up $300,000 for their collateral. It is hard to believe that the parents did not find funds for psychological help for their daughter. It appears that the girl received treatment in her early teens, but why and at what point it stopped? No one can say what was going on in the minds of Lacey's parents or herself, but the fact is that a healthy person would not voluntarily spend his life on the couch. Something must have happened in the girl's head that made it difficult or impossible for her parents to reach her, or maybe they just didn't want to deal with her. Lacey's parents were charged with manslaughter, but the charge was eventually reduced to second-degree murder. The verdict, unfortunately, has not yet been made, and this makes it very tragic that the girl's parents simply continue to live an ordinary, normal life, without admitting or feeling guilty of anything. Thank you for watching. I recommend watching other stories. Click right now, and also subscribe to my channel. See you soon.